22 часа 28 минут. Масса.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Touchdown, we have touchdown. Exit zone. Start Dragon deploy verified.
Welcome to Spacevidcast, episode 503, recorded live on Saturday, March 24th, 2012. You like the way I said that?
No.
No, all right. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham. With me, as always, is the beautiful, lovely, wonderful, and talented Carrie Ann Higginbotham. Before we get into today's show, I did want to mention the Dr. Lee Valentine LA Space Salon talk is up. If you're a Spacevidcast Epic subscriber, that's a full 1 hour, 40-minute presentation, commercial-free, that you can watch right there on the website.
It goes by really fast.
It does. It's a
really
fantastic
fast
presentation. We've got MSL Curiosity stuff coming up, probably within the next 48 hours. Well, we'll say 72. We've got Tom Mueller from SpaceX coming up within another week or so.
Another good one.
I forgot who else we have. We have like 2 more that are coming up.
Yeah.
So, and all of these will be optimized for Spacevidcast Epic. So there's a lot of really great stuff coming out on the website, and hopefully you're an Epic subscriber. On that note, let's go ahead and get started. Our first story is Orion's first flight in 2014. NASA built this nifty little video kind of detailing what the whole launch profile is going to look like. I like the video. You're not a huge fan of it.
It's not that I don't like the video. It's classic NASA. Something kind of interesting presented in one of the most boring fashions possible.
I think it's interesting presented in an interesting way. So here, you decide.
This is Jay Estes. I'm a deputy for flight test integration in the Orion program. What you see here is a Delta IV Heavy booster being launched from the pad. This is a flight test that Orion's going to conduct in 2014. It's a Delta IV Heavy unmanned booster with 2 strap-on boosters on the side. Once we get through first stage, the strap-on boosters separate themselves, and the central core continues on as a second stage. Once we get to low Earth orbit, the second stage shuts down and separates itself from the spacecraft and the upper stage. At that point, the upper stage lights and takes us onto orbit, and the service module panels separate, and then the launch abort system with its shroud, and which has been covering the capsule, comes off. In low Earth orbit, which is about 250 miles above the surface of the Earth, we make one orbit, and this orbit lets us check out our systems. After one orbit, we ignite the upper stage and we lift the orbit to about 3,600 miles. Now 3,600 miles is approximately 10 times higher than any man-rated spaceship has been since 1972 when we came back from the moon. And the reason we're doing this is to test our heat shield on entry. The heat shield will be exposed to heating much like you would get from the moon, and we'll be able to demonstrate that our heat shield is sufficient for recovering people from missions beyond Earth. And as we begin to enter, the capsule then separates from the service module section. Service module section stays attached to the upper stage, and here you see control jets that are firing, control the attitude for entry. And as we enter, we experience the maximum heating lower in the atmosphere. And this is a primary test of Exploration Flight Test 1, is that heat shield. As we get low in the atmosphere, the forward bay cover comes off, which covers the parachutes. Then 2 small chutes come out to slow us down. And after we slow down, those separate. 3 small pilot chutes come out to open 3 main parachutes, which initially open at about 3% opening. Then they go to 10% open, and then they go to full open. We use those staging to keep the forces on the chutes lower. It makes for a softer ride, and it keeps our chutes safe. We enter the water at a slight angle to help the crew with the impact of the water. The parachutes fall in the water. We hope to recover those. And we're cooperating with the Navy, and we're using one of their Welbeck ships to recover our capsule. And this Orion, after this space flight, will be refurbished and used again on an ascent abort test in the future.
All right, so the chat room is I don't want to say split 50-50. Most of them agree with Carrie Ann. Zigger to say this was interesting. All right, so here's what I think. I think the animations were epic.
Yes.
I actually did like the music. I don't think the music should have been this huge pumping type.
No.
You had said it reminded you of Soarin' at Disney.
Yeah.
That had kind of a really cool feel to it. But yeah, the narration needed a little bit of work. Regardless, an exciting mission. Orion 2014 going further than any spacecraft has gone before. I'm sorry, that's not a true statement. Then we've gone since the Apollo moon landings.
Right.
And getting ready to test deep space exploration. Unmanned. The chat room asked if it was manned. It was unmanned. This is a test vehicle. It's going on top of a Delta IV or Delta IV Heavy. So, it's an exciting mission. Maybe the voiceover needed a little bit of work, but exciting nonetheless. Speaking of exciting missions, exciting's a bit of a strong word. Launch event just happened. The ATV. Here you go. Here's the actual launch event. We'll come back and talk to you after you see the launch.
And lift off with ignition of SOBs.
Attention pour le décollage. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, unité, top, allumage Vulcain. Allumage confirmé. Top, allumage EAP, décollage. Tous les paramètres à bord sont nominaux.
So you can watch the ascent.
Well, we lost her to the low clouds.
I'll voice over it a little bit. That's an Ariane 5 rocket that you're seeing launch right there, and that's European Space Agency's rocket, and it's carrying the 3rd automated transfer vehicle that ESA has sent up to the International Space Station. And this is a vehicle, keep in mind, we've lost the space shuttle, so we need these vehicles to help transport cargo to and from this to the space station. Cargo, experiments, stuff like that. And so that's what you're watching right here is an automated vehicle go up to the space station and drop some supplies off. That's actually pretty cool. So we're handing some of the logistics off from the International Space Station over to the European Space Agency.
Yeah.
So, rather than fork over dollars, they're saying, hey, look, guys, we'll take care of some of the logistics of the space station. But we're not going to pay $1 gajillion to make this all go. So, I thought it was a fairly uneventful launch. I always think the Ariane 5 launches are beautiful. I think they're...
Yeah, I mean, just even that exhaust is...
Yeah, this one, it's hard to tell in this one because it's it's so dark, so you don't get as good of a... But yeah, they it's just a nice looking launch. It's cool to see ATV doing more and more stuff.
Yeah.
Hopefully you see more and more of those launches over time.
And they're quick, man. I don't want to say I've gotten used to watching space shuttles launch, but to a certain extent, just seeing something that fast come off the pad and just go is just, it's really exciting. That part's exciting.
And before we get into our main topic, I do want to talk about something. This was SDO. It's called Better Predicting Space Weather. So here's a shot from SDO, the Solar Dynamics Observatory. This is a satellite we've got floating in a orbit around the sun.
Yes.
I almost said around the moon. That would be silly. An orbit around the sun, and it's taking pictures of our nearest star and gathering data for us. And up until now, we've had a really hard time predicting solar storms, and that's where coronal mass ejection is going to kind of shoot magnetic particles towards the Earth, and that's going to interfere with our communications, our satellite, our electrical grid. I mean, it's a pain in the butt. And because the sun is going into something called solar maximum, that's where it's in this cycle, and it kind of gets more active and less active and more active. We're in one of those more active periods. It's important to be able to predict some of these storms so we can try to prevent damage to our satellites and objects flying overhead.
Totally.
Well, using SDO and a series of instruments, we've actually learned a lot about how our sun works, and we're getting really good at predicting when a solar storm is going to happen. Did you see those ropes? Here, let me...
Yeah, no, I don't think...
I didn't really talk about it. I just showed you the pretty picture, and I didn't talk about it. See some of those ropes kind of coming up? Those are magnetic flux loops, or coronal loops, or solar prominence, right? We found that if we look at these, we can help determine when a CME, a coronal mass ejection, is going to happen, when we're going to have a solar storm.
Wow.
And then we can better predict when all of that's going to happen.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's awesome stuff, because now we can say, oh, hey, that's going to be heading towards this bank of satellites. You can maybe shut part of the satellite down so it doesn't get messed up with. Maybe you could move the satellite, although that's a little bit more difficult and very costly. I mean, you can actually take preventative measures now to help prevent damage to infrastructure here on Earth and in space.
Awesome.
One of the other neat things about SDO is they have got an amazing marketing campaign going on right now.
They do.
I'm going to let you talk about this a little bit, because they've got Camilla, the rubber chicken.
Yes.
And they bring her everywhere. And
Camilla Corona SDO.
But tell me about what you were doing this last weekend.
So for those of you who were unable to join us for post-show of last week, we talked a little bit about I can't talk apparently, going to WonderCon, which is
WonderCon.
which is a sort of a subset of Comic-Con, if most people have kind of heard about that, with a little bit more of a sci-fi bend to it, which some people have said, well, Comic-Con kind of has a sci-fi bend to it. But back in the day, because this is like the 26th year of WonderCon, it had more of a sci-fi centric idea as opposed to sci-fi and comics and that kind of thing. Anyhow, the great thing about the marketing team with SDO and people who just work on the SDO project in general are doing is that they're going to these different sci-fi or science or STEM influenced conferences and setting up a booth, having a table and just doing some outreach into the community and explaining how you as just a general old person can get involved in science and space in your community. So while it was an SDO, a Solar Dynamics Observatory table, they also featured some other things like Yuri's Night. They're talking about the Venus transit that's going to be going on in June.
That's going to be cool.
It's the last time in the next 100 years where Venus is going to go actually between Earth and the Sun. And there's observing parties all over, particularly in the U.S. because the U.S. is going to have the best time period. It takes about 6 hours to get from one side of the sun all the way to the other, completely transit. And California, Alaska, Hawaii are going to have the biggest time frame because it starts around 3 p.m. Pacific. Anyway, so, and obviously when the sun goes down, you can't see it anymore. But there are observing parties all over the world. If there isn't one near you, which you can check the Solar Dynamics Observatory website, you can always start one, contact an observatory or university that's close by that might be interested in doing some things. And they will be broadcasting it on, I believe, on nasa.gov, but it could be the SDO's subsite. And so that you can watch it that way. You can watch it online. And NASA Edge, I believe, is going to be broadcasting it as well. So there's a couple different ways you can get to it, if not in person, possibly online.
All right, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, the main topic for the show. Stay with us. Spacevidcast will be right back.
to her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled with awesome expectation, this girl's a fascination, and nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. 'Cause she's fire walking, she's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving through the heat, keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking, she's fire walking to be free.
Microphones. There we go. Welcome back. The main topic for the show. This was on Bad Astronomer's blog.
Yep.
And this is why we should invest in science. Actually, let me swap out the graphics so you guys can see. There you go. There's the URL at the bottom of your screen, or hit our wiki. That is actually an easier to read URL.
Probably, yeah.
Right. So why we should invest in science. And the fundamental concept of the article is, look, there are all of these spin-off technologies we get from space. And the specific technology he was talking about was an improvement in rocket design and kind of creating a vortex with the rocket.
Right.
They were able to spin that off for firefighters. And they developed, they did some testing, they developed a new type of hose, a new type of system that would create the same vortex. And what took, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was a lot of water and over a minute to put out a fire. Took a fraction of the water in like 17 seconds to put out the same fire using this new system. And
a lot less water.
And, yeah.
So it was cheaper, faster, easier, and a lot less resources.
Right. So the question, the main topic of this show is, why should we invest in science? And because we're a space show, more specifically, why should we invest in space? And Phil at Bad Astronomer makes the argument of spin-off technologies. And I have a huge amount of respect for Phil, but I disagree with that particular point. I don't believe spin-off technologies is a good reason to develop science or space. And the reason for that is it's historically never been a reason to do anything. Christopher Columbus didn't say, hey, look, I'd like to go explore the world because we might get some spin-off technologies. We didn't go to the moon because we said, hey, look, we might get some spin-off technologies.
Right.
The major advancements in humanity weren't made because we said, hey, think of the spin-off technologies we're going to get. That's a modern day thing.
We're totally going to get GPS, you guys.
Right. That wasn't something that, and even when they put GPS up there, they didn't go, hey, think of the spin-off technologies. It was mostly a military, I mean, it's still, but it was, I mean, that was its fundamental purpose. So, spin-off technologies isn't a really good reason. And the second argument I have against spin-off technologies is, so they developed this vortex fire hose.
Right.
Who's to say that they wouldn't have developed that on their own? Who's to say that some firefighter wouldn't have said, dude, we can do this better, and they would have developed the exact same technology? Right? I mean, it's all where the money is.
Right.
So you throw that same budget towards firefighting technology, they probably would have come up with something just as good.
Right. And the nice thing about the spin-off technologies is that the chances of a spin-off technology having touched the average person's life is very, very high. Very, very good. And not just touch their lives, but touch their lives in a relatively significant way.
But you have to make that, you can't easily make that correlation.
I understand. But I'm just saying that when you're talking to the average citizen, when they say, what has NASA ever done for me? Because I haven't walked on the moon. I don't care about this, that, or the other. Then, you know, as someone who's trying to help justify it, you can turn to them and say, well, have you ever played football before? Have you ever used GPS before? Have you, you know, all of these different things? And they can say, well, yeah, my son plays football, but what does that have to do with NASA? And you can say, well, because of the padding in the seats for, what am I trying to say?
Astronauts?
Yes, for astronauts, for the impact, they wanted to cushion the impact. That technology eventually got developed into some of the padding that now goes into football helmets to help your noggin, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. You know, and I think it was Zigger in the chat room who said, what did he say? It's always cheaper to directly invest in the specific spin-off technology.
Right.
Right. So, you know, we're developing these rocket engines. Yeah, great, we created this fire hose, but what if we had just started with the concept of making a better fire hose? Couldn't we have done it a heck of a lot cheaper than developing a rocket engine? And let's flip that around. What if it wasn't NASA that did it? What if we developed the fire hose? There's nothing preventing that fire hose technology from spinning off into a new rocket engine. Right, so should we invest more in firefighting then, because we'll get great spin-off technology for space? This is why I don't think spin-off. Now, I'm not saying that we should not invest in science and space. Obviously, I don't believe that at all. I'm just saying that I'm not sure that's...
Wait, you don't not believe it?
Did I just double...
Try to be clear on that,
I think I just double negative myself.
We do very much so believe, wholeheartedly, we should be investing in space and science.
Yes. Now. I asked that same question earlier today. I posted it out on Facebook and on Twitter, and I got a couple of responses. Now, we did it only like an hour before the show, so we didn't get a whole lot. But here's what we did get well.
We will continue to get
I
more
need to
as
plan
the show
better.
goes on.
Exactly. I need to plan a lot better. So one of the responses was science is the future, and the future starts with you. And that's actually a halfway decent answer, right? I mean,
yes.
Imagine where we would have been had we not constantly tried to improve ourselves and constantly push the boundaries of where we're at. We would still be, have outdoor bathrooms, no heat or air conditioning. I mean, we'd be
right, but again, you're also still making the assumption. I mean, we're both playing devil's advocate for either and both sides at this point. However, you're making the assumption that people would be just as happy going outside and using a wooden facility, and that they would never try to push themselves for indoor plumbing ever.
True, fair.
So, you're kind of saying, like, well, if we hadn't pushed ourselves, we wouldn't get to, what's the saying? Like, if you shoot for the moon, or you shoot for the star, you'll land on the moon, or if you shoot for the moon, at least you'll hit space, or there's some sort of, like, try to overshoot. You want to get from here to here. So if you shoot for here, you might actually land here, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And that's great. But you're making the assumption that we would just sit on our laurels all day long. I mean, the people who push themselves to get to space, to get to the moon and far beyond, those people would still push themselves. I mean,
but aren't
you
we
can't
at a
change
point,
that part.
So my example may have been poor because back in the time when we didn't have indoor plumbing, we were the next big advancement would be indoor plumbing. Solving basic stuff that we take for granted today. But we've already solved that. So does that mean, are we at a point in time where the reason for science is because that is the next thing? That's the next indoor plumbing. I don't know how else to word that, right? It's the thing
you
that
have
we
to continue to push yourself in order to advance. Yes, I mean any D&D gamer knows that. I'm kidding. It was a joke. I'm sorry.
All right. So the next comment was, without science, there's no future. So interesting that we have two comments, both talking about where the future is going to be.
Right.
There's no future worth having. Have to move forward and expand to fill the available space for our existence. And that's from G-Cubed on Twitter as well. So it seems to be, at least in the space community right now, that a lot of people feel like it's our future and we have to do it. But now, let me throw this out there as well. Here's another question for you guys.
Okay, but USKO in the chat room said that science is seed corn, but you don't eat it.
Okay. Then how do we justify it?
Isn't that justifiable?
Harder to justify.
Is it?
Well, yeah, sure. So you've got
it's the basis. It's the foundation.
No,
you don't have the building without such.
No, the argument is constantly, oh yeah, but people don't care about the foundation of the building. People care about how the woodwork looks and do they have wooden floors.
So now you're going back to Tang, essentially.
No. So the fundamental problem is people always, you hear this argument all the time. Why are we spending money up in space when we have issues down here?
Down here, right.
It's an invalid argument. Hopefully all you space geeks know how to battle that argument, which is we don't spend any money in space. All of that money is spent down here, right? So we put stuff in space, but that money exists down here. Those jobs exist down here. Mm-hmm. The economy and a good chunk of that infrastructure exists all down here.
Right. So,
yeah, that doesn't make any sense. You hear that argument constantly. So, and when you're building a house, you don't say, that foundation. We gotta work on that a little bit more. The people. I mean, maybe the people building the house, but those would be the equivalent of the scientists. The people moving into the house, they don't care so much. They don't pay attention to the foundation. They pay attention to, all the stuff around the house that really doesn't impact the house that much, right? It's not the structure of the house. It's what makes it look pretty.
All right, that's fair.
It was a very roundabout way to get to my point, but I think I eventually did get there.
Yes, eventually you did.
So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Right.
I guess my question is, all right, so science is the foundation. That's great. What do we need to do to make it pretty so that we can funnel some of that money into the areas that need it to be funneled to? You look at NASA, and we've got this weird budget thing going on where the really successful robotic programs are having their money funneled away into the non-successful human programs that will probably never lift off the ground. So we're starving the successful, really good scientific stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, I think humans need to be in space. I think that's woefully important. We can't just do it with robots. But you can't be throwing it at programs that are going to destroy the robotic missions too. It's not a one or the other. You need to do both. They're equally as important. So how do we convince people? How do we help them understand? Yeah, this is important stuff. That's the topic of our main show today.
That could be the topic of the whole year.
That could be the topic of the whole year. We'd love to hear your comments. Much like we got comments earlier today on Twitter, give us comments on Twitter, Facebook, comment on YouTube. I love video comments on YouTube. If you want to be almost guaranteed a spot in one of the future shows, send a video comment to this one explaining your point. Do it in a...
but in a concise way. We can't deal with like hour videos.
Correct. Keep it down to a minute and a half. Tell us what you think. Don't be insulting. I mean, be intelligent on the video. But yeah, I mean, I see those are going straight in the show. Right?
So Zero Cool 1989 says that my teacher says everything has already been invented.
What?
Is that
Your teacher said that?
Is that an ignorant thing to say? Are we, in an area of pure reinventing?
Who? A teacher said that? Oh my God! I am so conflicted right now. All right, you need to go to a different school.
Well, there's that, but just ignore that part. But Chris Radcliffe, I think, made the best sort of knock on that statement, which is, really? Because where's my hoverboard?
Yeah, we are there. We are so far from having even a fraction of the knowledge of how the universe works, which means once we get more knowledge, we can invent more stuff. There's no possible way.
But I mean, people have been saying that for eons, since the beginning of time. We have now come to the best time of anyone's life ever. There's no such thing, computers are going to be completely impractical because you won't be able to fit them inside of an average house. Hello? That kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly, right?
For how many people have said that, have gone on record and said there's no way you will ever get a tiny little listening device and be able to speak to someone on the other side of the world. You will never even, people who live in China will never, ever get to see San Francisco because it's way too far away. People have always said stuff like that. Sadly, yes, it is an extremely ignorant thing to say, but people have always been saying it.
Yeah, but our teachers should not be saying that. That's sure, I will accept someone who's not as well educated, and certainly not someone who's educating our youth.
Clearly not a teacher in any of the STEM programs. Was
that
a gym teacher by any means?
Oh, please don't tell me.
Not saying that gym teachers are
Zero Cool, please don't tell me that was a science teacher, because I would be very, very upset. On that note, I'm going to go back to break because I am so flabbergasted by that.
You're all pink.
I can't. I hope you were exaggerating. I seriously do. Yeah, as Ghost 250 says, teachers should be promoting
inventiveness.
Inventiveness. I'll go with that. That works. Otherwise, the human race is out of luck. Well, I reworded it slightly. Yeah. On that note, let's take a quick break. When we come back, some more comments and some more space news. So speaking of first orbit, I think this is a really good opportunity to transition into Yuri's Night, which is coming up April 12th. This is the 51st anniversary of the first human in space, Yuri Gagarin. First Orbit, the movie and the commercial you just saw, is a movie about the very first orbit of Yuri Gagarin. And
not just Yuri's first orbit,
right.
Humanity's first orbit.
Humanity's first orbit, exactly.
Just saying.
And Yuri's Night is a global... You want to talk about Yuri's Night for a moment? What it is?
Sure. Yuri's Night is a worldwide party that's celebrating human presence in space.
Huzzah!
That is my Twitterized pitch.
That 160 character, 40 character.
Right. I perfected at WonderCon. That's what Yuri's Night is. And the idea is that... you know, obviously, Yuri Gagarin was the very first human in space, April 12th, 1961. So, like Ben said, 51 years ago on April 12th. And there's parties going on not just in the U.S., and not just in North America, and not just around the world, but off-world as well, right? So there's usually a party on the International Space Station. There's also parties that are in virtual reality, and I believe more than one virtual reality. We have World of Warcraft parties, there's parties in Second Life, etc., parties everywhere. So you basically... Your only excuse to not be at a Yuri's Night party is because you've never heard of it before. And now that you're listening, you have. So if there isn't a party near you, please feel free to make one. Even if it's a private party, a party people have to pay for, it's just you and your cat that night, whatever the case is, make sure you log in, register a party, or find one close to you, yurisnight.net.
So one campaign or one...
it's a campaign.
Okay. So a campaign that Yuri's Night is currently running is, why do you celebrate Yuri's Night? And they're looking for video submissions as to why you... Is it a contest or just a campaign?
No, it's just a campaign for the most part. It's to get the excitement out there. And the really great thing is that there's already a bunch of videos lined up with really big names that have Bob Richards, Pete Worden, Ken Davidian, you know, the list goes on and on. I think Charlie Bolden is in there explaining really quickly why they celebrate Yuri's Night. And so when you submit your video, it's put into the lineup and it will be presented. It's already in YouTube, obviously, but then we'll string a whole bunch together and put them on for the webcast, I believe, as well.
I think we should answer that question on the show, but before we do that, we found one that we liked.
Yeah.
And so here you go. Here's one of the videos. I celebrate Yuri's Night because...
Hi, my name's Ken Davidian, and I work for the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. I celebrate Yuri's Night because in every job that must be done, there's an element of fun. You find the fun and snap the job's a game. Going to space is not going to be an easy thing, but finding the fun and celebrating going to space, which is what Yuri's Night is what makes the job a game. And this is what's going to get everybody excited and enthused and help us complete this job a little bit faster with a lot more fun.
So that's what they're looking for, right? Just a quick little 1 minute, why do you celebrate Yuri's Night? And if I were to say why I celebrate Yuri's Night, it's because I'm a huge fan of major tipping points for humanity, and that was one of them. The first time any human went into space, that was a big deal. The first time we developed a reusable or refurbishable spacecraft that could go up and down at multiple cycles into space. That was the space shuttle. 20 years after Yuri Gagarin's flight, that was a big deal. And that's why I celebrate Yuri's Night. You?
I like the perspective that getting someone off planet really sort of gave us. Granted, at first, it really only gave Yuri that kind of perspective. And I don't mean perspective in a physical sense, as in, you know, you're close to the camera, you're far away from the camera, but actual, really perspective. People say that when they go up into space and they look back down on the Earth, one of the things that really sort of hits them is that there's no borders, there's no lines. You don't get to see where Minnesota ends and Wisconsin starts anymore. We're all just one big, happy family on this little blue marble.
You know, and moving to the next story, one of the problems with spaceflight up until now has been that it's for a select few, right? Yuri Gagarin goes up and he's looking down in awe and wonderment at the Earth. And that's a common theme that you hear. People look back at this little blue marble we live on and they're like, I have a totally new perspective on everything. But how do you explain that to someone who hasn't been able to see that? Well, it's very difficult, nay impossible to do. The best way to do it is to allow anyone up into space so that they can look down on Earth and see it from the same view that
anyone who wants to go.
Anyone who wants to go, correct. Now, that's going to be a long process. It's not going to be something that happens overnight, but Virgin Galactic, X-Corp, Armadillo Aerospace, Maston Space, these are companies that are working on making that happen. And it's projected that space tourism could be worth a $1 billion industry in 10 years. I think that's incredibly pessimistic.
Well, it is coming from the FAA head.
Yeah. So let's put this into perspective. With the number of seats sold on Virgin Galactic right now, that alone is $600 million. So let's just say that Virgin Galactic could fly
everyone. Talk about a heavy hitter.
Let's just say they could fly everyone that has tickets in 2 years. I don't think that's a reasonable time frame, but let's just say they could. In 2 years, they're already $600 million to that $1 billion industry.
Right.
Right. Obviously, it'd have to be year over year, but
60%.
I think that number is going to be higher than $1 billion in 10 years. And I realize Virgin Galactic is always 2 years away. They're always 2 years away, but you know, there is a point when they will fly. They'll do it when it's safe. And there is a point when people are going to start to look at that and go, oh, wow, that's amazing. Same thing with X-Corp and Lynx. There's a point when it's going to fly. There's a point where they can just start taking more and more flights. And as they learn how to do this more frequently, the cost will start to go down, right? So sure, it's $200,000 today on Virgin Galactic. It's $100,000 on an X-Corp Lynx. What about in 5 years? Maybe $50,000.
Right.
So I think that's a very pessimistic number. I think optimistically, $2 to $5 billion industry in 10 years.
Sure.
Maybe I'm just crazy, right? But I think that's what we'll really be looking at, and that should also include more than just say Virgin and X-Corp. If you want to take a flight on, if you want to do an Apollo 8 style flight around the moon, you can do that. If you have the money, you can do that. It's $100 million, I want to say it is.
Or what if you just want to go up for a little vacay, you know?
A little vacay?
No, but right? I mean, you go up, you spend a night in Bigelow Hotel.
Sure. You could, yeah.
Right.
So, assuming it's all ready to go, absolutely. But speaking of going up and spending a vacay, there is one problem, that's space debris. We're just going to touch on this for a moment. The ISS crew almost had to take shelter due to space debris coming in within the pizza box zone, where they didn't have quite enough notification, so they couldn't quite move the ISS. Space debris is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. It's all of the spacecraft that we send up there always leaves like garbage and debris. When other satellites smash into each other, that creates debris. All of that slowly starts to slide back down to Earth as the Earth's gravity pulls on it. And, you know, something tiny isn't a big deal here on Earth. It's not going to hurt you too much unless that tiny little thing was coming at you at 17,500 miles an hour. Then that tiny little thing is going to do a whole lot of damage to you. That's the problem in space. Those are the velocities we're talking about. So just a little nut or bolt could just rip right through part of a spacecraft or through a solar panel or cause a fantastic amount of damage.
Bullets are tiny, Zigger says.
Yeah.
There you go. That's a good analogy.
Yeah, so something to kind of watch for. There's more on this story. Again, hit our wiki. You can get, it's easier to read the link in the wiki. But fun that we've seen this before, right? We've covered this story in the past. There was a full evacuation where they were sitting in the Soyuz pads in June of 2010 or 2011.
Something
I don't remember.
like that. Scary times.
It wasn't terribly long time ago. We actually broke into our live broadcast. We're like, hey, they're evacuating right now. And there was a chance they would have to actually, that one came in within a couple 100 feet of the station, I think. This was about 9 miles close to the space station. So, you know, but when you're talking about those velocities, you want to be sure. Right?
You want to be
sure.
Careful.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some of the things you guys commented on for our last show. And actually, speaking of video comments, here you go from YouTube.
Hey, what's up? This is Mike from Epic Future Space, and I just wanted to briefly respond to Spacevidcast Season 5, Episode 2. Welcome back, by the way. In that episode, Ben and Carrie Ann talked about how a lot of people have been saying that Brazil is going to be the next major space power. And I agree with Ben in disagreeing with that assumption, but I do want to talk about how Brazil could potentially be a major player. Now, Ben and Carrie Ann already talked about how they have their own launch facilities, the Alcantara Space Center, and they're really close to the equator, which gives you tons of benefits when trying to reach orbit. In my mind, what makes Brazil a potential major player is their partnership with Ukraine. Ukraine is one of the 3 countries that inherited the Soviet space program after the Soviet Union broke up. And they never stopped building rockets. They kept going. They have 3 different families of rockets. There's the Cyclone rocket, which is now retired, but they're building the Cyclone 4 rocket with the Brazilians. There's going to be a little bit of Brazilian hardware on it, and it's going to be launching from the Alcantara Space Center. They also have the Dnieper rocket, which is their small satellite launcher, which has launched the Bigelow Genesis 1 and 2 spacecraft. And then they have their Zenit launcher, which is actually pretty powerful. And not only can they launch it from anywhere on land, but the Ukrainian government is partial owners of the sea launch venture. So they can launch the Zenit from that sea platform just about anywhere they want. And they are pretty big. I mean, they have launched for so many other countries. Just last year, in 2011, Ukraine was number 5 in launch providers after Russia, China, the United States, and the European Space Agency. But still, they're in the top 5. They already are a major player. And they have lots of really ambitious plans coming up for the future. And it's not really Brazil that's going to be the major player, but Ukraine, which is going to be providing that stuff. And they're not going to be launching all of their rockets from the Alcantara, just Cyclone 4 at this point in time, but that could change. And this whole partnership has inspired other countries to hit them up. Like Argentina, for example, is going to Brazil and being like, yo, we want in on this. Venezuela has also expressed interest, and we might be witnessing the birth of a South American space agency modeled after the European space agencies. So there's lots of cool stuff there. And don't be so quick to dismiss Brazil and all these developments that are going on, because it could potentially be something pretty big in the future. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for watching, and remember, everybody, ad astra, to the stars!
Yes! That is the kind of comment I like. Thank you very much, Mike. That was awesome. You know, that's a really great insight into the space programs. I think that was absolutely phenomenal, and I couldn't agree more. So you're absolutely right. I'm still going to dismiss them quickly because that's what I do. But yeah, absolutely. So well said, Mike. Also on YouTube, so this was speaking of the Russians' ambitious space program to get their 18-year plan. If the Russians are trying to get back to where they were in the 50s and 60s with their financial issues, they are in for a disappointment. Also, they're thinking the wrong way. Moon first, then Mars. We need the moon for a jumping point. Well, keep in mind, Russia wasn't talking about putting humans on Mars just yet. They were talking about putting ground stations on Mars right now. And so you don't necessarily need to go to the moon and then go to Mars to put robots and ground stations up there.
Right.
In fact, that might even be more difficult. But I don't necessarily disagree with you. Going to the moon is an easy jumping point for humans to get to Mars because you don't have to deal with the Earth's gravity well. But you do have to have kind of a lunar fuel depot at that point. And that's frankly infrastructure that doesn't exist today. Bottom line is, without getting attacked by a species from somewhere out in deep space, we will never see large-scale ships like those in sci-fi movies. We humans need a common enemy to hate in order to put our petty differences aside and get along. And once again, this was same fundamental topic. Yeah, we do. Right next. You agree? I'm 50-50 on that one.
I don't know. Well, I mean, yeah, I'm kind of 50-50 as well. I'm wondering if we should wag the dog a little bit, and the idea of the tail wagging the dog as opposed to the dog wagging the tail, and somehow fake getting attacked from some deep space intergalactic species or something like that, so that we can then all band together. And I mean, I'm sure we've gone into wars for less.
You know, I don't know. I feel like humanity is making incremental improvements into more of a Star Trek-like civilization, right? It used to be that it was in just cities that would fight each other, and then it was kind of, now we're kind of at countries, and now we're kind of at, more religions.
Right.
Once we get past that, I think we might be at a point where we're all like, we can do some pretty cool things if we all band together, and we should celebrate our differences. That may not happen in my lifetime, but I think that, well, yeah, but I mean, consider how long humanity's been here, and how long these wars have been waging. That might happen. So I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying today, but I do feel like we're moving towards a civilization where that won't be the case in the future. War is a driving point, but it's not the only driving point, I think. All right. So on that note, let's take another quick break. When we come back, we've got more comments from our last show that we're going to bring up from you guys in the space community. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Whoops, probably should have fixed that. Yeah, so I'm not an Angry Birds fan. Like, I don't dislike it, but it's one of those games where I'm like, yeah, that was fun, and I played half of one, and then I was done. But I will say, there's something about Angry Birds Space. It's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Well, kind of like
they really made a great game with that.
You were talking about space debris earlier and how it's very slowly kind of coming into Earth's gravitational pull and then falling back towards Earth. One of the interesting things about Angry Birds Space is that there's different bodies that you kind of have to work around that each have their own different kind of gravitational pull. So sometimes you kind of go between one or two, and instead of getting directly pulled down to this one because there's another one up here, you might get sucked into that gravitational pull. Maybe you'll do another 8 around that, or et cetera, which I thought was really interesting and a different twist on the entire thing. Granted, if you're not an Angry Birds fan, you're not an Angry Birds fan, and it's not that big of a deal, but we found it fun, so we figured we'd put it in.
So they mentioned in the chat room there's a good sponsor for us to have. They're not a sponsor. They should be a sponsor.
They should be.
But we just thought the game was cool, so we threw the ad in there. So going back to some comments from last week's show, we talked a bit about that maglev space system.
Yes.
Yeah, again. This was a comment on that regarding maglev to space. Being a static structure, doesn't that restrict you to launching payload into the same orbit? Basically, you're in the same inclination. Yeah, kind of. So well, I mean,
it depends on how far out that you need to go. It's not like you're always going to be geosynchronous at that point.
Yeah, so it depends on how much power the spacecraft has to actually fly on its own. So you could also have a rocket on the end of that, so then it could steer itself into whatever orbit it wanted to.
Right.
From a power standpoint, that doesn't make as much sense. So a lot of those satellites would be kind of at the same general vicinity. But no, it doesn't mean that you have to be in the same inclination. It's how much power can you have on the vehicle to change where it's going to go.
Right, and when you think about it, a lot of people launch from the same pad at Cape Canaveral, and they go to different places.
Yeah. Same thing with Vandenberg or anything else. It's the same concept. The difference being, of course, at that point, you know, obviously you already have the rockets and you can just start to do whatever you want.
Because the Earth moves.
Well, you go in the direction of the Earth spinning. You use that to your advantage. You do the same thing here. That's no different. But you would use the rocket to kind of steer the vehicle. This, you'd have to kick the rocket on after it's already gotten a good chunk of its velocity. So not a huge difference. But yeah, you would pretty much have to have some sort of steering mechanism and rocket power on the vehicle itself, which does take away from some of its benefit. So I mentioned that Dragon was surprisingly big inside. I actually called it a TARDIS. It's also like the Orion. You could probably fit a bathroom in it as needed, which I would hope so, right? I mean, you're talking about deep space exploration going for 9 months. That would be a good thing to do. But Armstrong complaining about SpaceX, he's wrong on this one, as commercial vehicles like Dragon, CST-100, and Dream Chaser, which is like a small space shuttle, are absolutely necessary to do mundane things like low Earth orbit transport so NASA can concentrate on exploration. Otherwise, Orion is forced to be a jack of all trades like the shuttle, and there's simply not going to be enough money for things like Nautilus or even a lunar lander. And that I would agree, right? I mean, historically, that's exactly what we've seen. And we don't want a vehicle that's a jack of all trades and master of none, right? We had that in the space shuttle, and we got stuck to low Earth orbit for 30 years. We haven't been back to the moon forever. So let's not do that again. Let's have a vehicle that's designed for deep space exploration, a vehicle designed for humans to low Earth orbit, a vehicle that's designed for payloads to... I mean, let's just do a bunch of these different things. And then if any one of them has a problem, you don't stop your entire space program because one vehicle had a problem. You've got a bunch of different vehicles to pick from, so you can continue to have space operations. So yeah, pulling all of our eggs out of one basket, which was the space shuttle, is a good idea. Not putting them all back into one basket again, which historically we've kind of wanted to do.
Let's make that mistake.
Exactly, that's also a very good idea. So fundamentally, I kind of agree with that. Going back to the Russia story, I don't see Russia doing this, I just can't. And that's from Dan Graphics. You know, Russia had a lunar rocket, right? They were... I don't want to say on the cusp, but they could have gone to the moon had they wanted to. Had they had a little bit more time, they might have been able to make that work. You just have to have a willingness to do it, right? You just have to make the decision as a country, yep, we're going to do this. This is something we're going to stand by, and we're going to put money and resources behind it. This is going to happen. The question remains, are they going to stand behind it? It's still way too early to tell. I said that international cooperation in space is worse than national efforts. I think that's... I guess it doesn't have to be a national effort. I guess I'm saying a group is not as powerful as the individual. So any cooperative effort, be it international or even just a series of different companies banding together, when you get groups going together like that, then you have to make everyone happy and you have to make compromise. And it's not quite as efficient as just someone up top saying, this is what we're going to do, let's go. Anyhow, that's true, but only for government-run programs like the International Space Station. It's like everything that's wrong with big government multiplied by X. Private international cooperation is completely different. Not sure I agree with that statement, but where your iPhone was designed, assembled, components coming from, why is it cheaper this way than building everything in a single country? Free trade and division of labor combines the best countries, and worse like government. So, yeah, but keep in mind, it was all dictated by Apple. So China, the Foxconn in China didn't say, hey, you need to build your iPhone this way, let's compromise, let's see what we can do. China said, you're going to build it like this, and if you can't, we're going to find someone else who can. So that is actually more proving my point of...
Zinger makes a good statement. He says, so dictatorships do have their place. They provide focus and drive.
Yeah, but do they have their place in a government? See, my point is, it doesn't necessarily have to be a government entity doing this.
Right.
So there are times when dictatorships outside of government or in a conceptual, we're trying to get from point A to point B standpoint, probably do have a place. But there are times when they don't have a place either. And in my personal opinion, government, that can get messy because once you start talking about that, now you have these power struggles and it gets all wonky. But when we're talking about space and exploring space, which is what this show is about, it makes a little bit more sense. When you've got a single focused driving effort as opposed to a bunch of little things, I think we might be able to do a little bit more. I don't really know. It's just a crazy thought, and I have a lot of those. And finally, while I love the idea that Russians are planning big things in space, the question people need to ask is, are they putting their money where their mouth is? I think the Russians could do this